Hey, my name is Caleb. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a finishing carpenter doing residential renovations out of a small shop I rent off the back of a lumber yard in Harlan, Kentucky. I frame closets. I hang doors that have swollen shut from 20 years of Kentucky humidity. I build bookshelves into walls like they were always supposed to be there. I replace rotted windowsills with new pine, sand it flush, paint it twice, and walk away without anyone ever noticing the work was done, which is exactly how it should be. When a repair is done right, you forget it was ever broken. That's the thing about finished carpentry. The whole point is invisibility. I drive a white truck that has a dent in the rear quarter panel I never fixed because the estimate was $400, and I kept deciding there were better things to do with $400. I keep a level on the passenger seat and a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder. I wake up at 5:15, load whatever I need for the day's job, and I'm usually working by 7. By 4 in the afternoon, I'm done. I sweep up. I lock the job site. I drive back through town, pick up something from the diner on Clement Street if I'm too tired to cook, and eat at the small table in my kitchen while I look at whatever measurements or materials list I need for the next morning. The apartment is a 2-bedroom above a paint shop on the edge of downtown. I use the second bedroom as a workshop for smaller pieces, custom molding, cabinet face frames, that kind of thing. At night it smells like sawdust and linseed oil, which I don't mind at all. I'm not lonely in some dramatic way. I'm not sitting at the window watching other people's lives. I just notice sometimes that the only sound in the apartment after 8 o'clock is whatever I've put on the radio, and that when something good happens during the day, a metered corner that comes out perfectly, a customer who tears up a little when they see what a repaired room can look like. There's no one to tell it to when I get home. That had been the shape of things for about 3 years, which is how long it had been since Claire and I stopped talking. We didn't end badly. That was almost the problem. We just ran out of reasons to keep choosing each other, the way a battery runs down, not broken, just depleted. She moved to Lexington and I stayed in Harlan, and after a while her number in my phone started to feel like a museum exhibit. Something that used to matter, behind glass now. I hadn't dated much since then. There was a woman named Pam I'd met at the hardware store who I went to dinner with twice before she said, very kindly, that I seemed like I was still somewhere else. She wasn't wrong. I thanked her and meant it, and that was that. My neighbor across the hall is a woman named Dottie. She is 64 years old, has a tabby cat named Gerald, and makes a point of knowing everything that happens in this building and most of what happens on this block. She is not nosy in the pushy sense. She is interested in people the way a good carpenter is interested in wood. She wants to know what they're made of, what they can hold, where they're likely to split under pressure. In early October, she knocked on my door on a Sunday evening while I was eating leftover chicken and reading the materials estimate for a job I was starting Monday. "I told my friend Barb's daughter about you," she said, without preamble. I looked at her. Her name is Nora. She's 33. She designs kitchens for a living, cabinets, layouts, finishes, all that. I told her you work with wood, and she said that was interesting, which is more than she's said about anyone in a year and a half. "Dottie," I said, "she's been through something. I'm not going to tell you what because it's hers to tell. But she's a good person, and she doesn't need saving. She just needs someone who isn't in a hurry and isn't going to be dramatic about things. I don't know her. That's what the date is for, Caleb." She handed me a piece of paper with a phone number on it, written in her careful, old-fashioned cursive. Nora Vance, a local number. I looked at the number for probably 3 days longer than was reasonable. I told myself I was busy, which was true. The Monday job was a full kitchen renovation that ran long. I told myself I didn't want to be set up by a neighbor. I told myself that the timing wasn't right, that I had a big cabinet install coming in November, that it would be unfair to start something when my schedule was going to get complicated. I knew none of that was the real reason. The real reason was that starting something meant being willing to end up back where I'd been 3 years ago, eating alone in an apartment that smelled like someone else had been in it recently. That specific kind of quiet. On Thursday evening, I texted the number Dottie had given me. I said my name was Caleb, that Dottie had given me her number, and that I understood completely if this was strange, and she wanted to leave it at that. I hit send and put the phone face down on the counter. She texted back in 4 minutes. She said, "Not strange, just unexpected. Are you free Saturday evening?" We agreed on a restaurant called Porter's on the main street downtown. Nice enough to mean it, casual enough not to make either of us feel like we were auditioning. 7 o'clock. I said I'd be the one in the work jacket because I only owned one jacket, and it was a Carhartt, and I was sorry about that. She said that was fine. She said she'd be easy to spot. I did not ask why. Saturday was the kind of October evening that arrives in Kentucky like a held breath, cool and still, with the smell of leaves and wood smoke, and a sky going from orange to deep blue behind the courthouse steeple. I parallel parked on Clement Street at 6:50, walked to Porter's, and stood outside the door for a moment to collect myself. I almost went home. I was standing there thinking about the chicken in my refrigerator and the materials list I hadn't finished reviewing. And something in me was calculating very seriously whether I could text her a reasonable excuse and whether she would believe it. I stood there long enough that a couple coming out of the restaurant looked at me a little funny. Then I opened the door and went in. The hostess said my reservation was at the back table. I walked through the restaurant, past the bar, past a table of older men watching football on a TV mounted in the corner. And I looked toward the back of the room. She was already there. She was sitting at the table in a wedding dress. Not a veil, not the full cathedral spread of it, but unquestionably a wedding dress, white or off-white, with a fitted bodice and what I could see of a skirt spreading around the chair, the fabric catching the warm light of the restaurant. Her hair was loose and dark and fell to her shoulders in a way that looked like she hadn't planned it. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. She was looking at me the way you look at someone when you already know what their first reaction is going to be, and you're bracing for it. The man at the bar glanced over. The hostess behind me paused, just slightly, in whatever she was doing. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked to the table and sat down across from her. She looked at me, brown eyes, steady with something careful behind them that was working hard to look like calm. "I know," she said. "Okay," I said. "It's not what you think." I looked at her. I looked at the dress. I looked back at her face. "All right," I said. "Then tell me what it is." She let out a breath. Not a sigh, exactly. More like something she'd been holding for several hours. "I had a wedding today," she said. "This morning, or I was supposed to." I waited. It didn't happen. The wedding. It's a long story, and I'll tell you the whole thing if you want. But the short version is that he called it off at the church, about 2 hours before. She pressed her lips together briefly. I couldn't go home. My apartment is our apartment, his and mine, and all his family is there. And my mother was crying, and everyone was looking at me like I'd just been told I had 6 months to live. And I couldn't sit in the middle of all of that. She looked at her hands. Dottie called because she somehow already knew. Don't ask me how. I think she may have some kind of network. And she said her neighbor was a good person and the reservation was already made and I should go if I wanted to. And I thought it might be better than sitting in a parking lot for 4 hours. She looked up at me. "So here I am," she said, "in a wedding dress, on a first date, with a complete stranger." The waiter appeared at the edge of the table. He looked at me, he looked at her, he looked at me again. "Can I get you anything to drink?" he asked professionally. "Water for me," I said. "And could you give us a few minutes?" He nodded and disappeared with great speed. I leaned back in my chair. I looked at her, at the set of her jaw and the slight redness at the corners of her eyes. That was the only evidence anything had happened at all. The dress looked like it cost more than my truck. There was a small pull in the lace at the left shoulder where she'd probably caught it on something. "What's the long version?" I asked. She looked at me. Whatever she'd been bracing for, that wasn't it. "The long version? You said there was a long version. I'm not in a hurry." Her name was Nora Vance. She was 33. She designed kitchens for a firm based out of Lexington, though she worked remotely from Harlan because her mother was here, and she'd always liked small towns, even when she told herself she was going to leave them eventually. She'd been with a man named Garrett for 2 years, met him at a trade conference, liked his certainty, liked that he knew where he was going, engaged for 8 months. She'd spent those 8 months planning something that, the more she described it, sounded like his vision of what their life should look like, rather than hers. The restaurant, the caterer, the guest list, the apartment that his family had helped them find. He said this morning that he didn't think either of us would be happy, she said. She said it without particular bitterness, the way you describe a car that broke down on the highway, factual almost. He said he'd been feeling that way for a while, that he should have said something sooner. She looked at the water glass she'd been turning slowly in her hands. He wasn't wrong about the happiness part. I think I knew too. I kept thinking it would settle, that we would settle into it. Did you love him? She looked at me steadily for a moment. I think I loved who I thought he was in the first few months. After that, I was mostly trying to make something work. She set the glass down, which is not what anyone wants to hear from someone in a wedding dress on the night their wedding didn't happen, I realize. "You don't have to manage what I think," I said. She looked at me again, differently that time. The waiter came back. She ordered a bowl of soup and a glass of wine, and looked like she might cry for a moment when she said the word soup, and then didn't. I ordered the same thing I always ordered at Porter's, which was the roasted chicken, and I asked for bread for the table. When the waiter left, she looked at the tablecloth. "You haven't asked me why I stayed," she said. "Stayed where?" "In the dress. I could have changed. Barb, my mother's friend, had a car. She could have driven me somewhere. I could have found something else to wear." She looked up. I didn't want to. I don't entirely know why. I think I wanted to. Not pretend it didn't happen exactly, but not hide it either. It happened. I was there. I wore this. She smoothed the fabric at her lap once, absently. I didn't want to fold it up and put it in a bag like it was something to be ashamed of. I thought about that for a moment. "That seems right," I said. "Does it?" "Covering something up doesn't undo it. You just end up with a thing you're pretending isn't there." She was quiet. "What do you do?" she asked. "Dottie said you work with wood." I told her. "Finish carpentry, residential work, Harlan and the surrounding county mostly, the kind of work where the goal was to make the repair invisible." She tilted her head slightly when I said that, the invisible part. "I do the opposite," she said. "Kitchen design, everything I do is meant to be noticed." Someone has to. It's all the same thing though, isn't it? Making a space work, whether you see the work or not. I looked at her. I hadn't expected that. Yeah, I said. It is. We ate dinner. We ate dinner for an hour and 40 minutes. And somewhere in the first half hour, the dress stopped being what I was looking at and became just part of the evening. A thing that had happened. Sitting at the table with us, like a third person we'd both agreed not to make a big deal of. She ate most of her soup. She drank 2 glasses of wine, slowly. She asked me questions about the carpentry, not polite questions, real ones. About joinery and wood movement and what kinds of clients made the work feel worthwhile. I told her about a family I'd done work for last spring, a single mother with 2 kids in a house so cramped you couldn't walk through the living room without turning sideways. I'd built a set of bookshelves into the wall of the narrow hallway, floor to ceiling, with a fold-down desk built into the middle section. Tripled the usable storage in the house. The mother had stood in that hallway for a long time after, just looking at it. Nora was quiet for a moment. "That's what it's supposed to be," she said. "What?" "The work. That's what it's supposed to do." She looked at the table, then back at me. "I designed a kitchen for a woman last year who was moving into her first house, just hers. She'd been in a marriage for a long time, and then she wasn't. And she bought this small house, and she wanted a kitchen that felt like herself. She kept saying that, I want it to feel like me, but I don't know what that means." She paused. We spent 3 hours on the phone once, just talking about what she cooked and what she liked to look at when she was cooking, and whether she was a morning person or a night person. The kitchen we ended up with was bright and simple, and had a window over the sink she could look out of into her yard. She looked down at her hands. She sent me a photo, months later, of herself standing at that window. She looked, I don't know, settled, like she'd landed somewhere. We were both quiet for a moment. "I don't get that often," she said. "Clients who know what they actually want. Most people know. They just need someone to ask, right?" She looked at me again. That careful study, like she was taking a measurement. When the check came, I put my card down before she could reach for her bag. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." She looked at me with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite gratitude. Something in between. "Dottie said you weren't in a hurry about things," she said. "She's right, generally. She said you were quiet, that you were the kind of person who fixed things and didn't make a lot of noise about it. Also true. She was describing me to you, too." She looked at the table for a moment. "She told me you were steady, that you were the kind of man who showed up when he said he would and you didn't need to be thanked for it." She looked up. I think she was trying to tell me that not all of them are like Garrett. I signed the receipt and put my wallet back. "Not all of them are," I said. She nodded, once small, like she was filing something away. We walked out together. On the sidewalk outside, the October air was cold now, properly cold, and I watched her cross her arms over the front of the dress, which was not built for October evenings, and look up at the street for a moment. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" I asked. "My mother's. I called her while you were in the bathroom. She's going to be—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "She's going to need to fuss at me, and I'm going to have to let her. That seems reasonable. It's going to be a long night." "Yeah." She stood there for a moment. The dress caught a gust off the street, and she put a hand down to hold the skirt. She looked at me, and there was something in her face, not the careful composure she'd walked in with. Something underneath it. Something that was a little bit scared and a little bit very quietly, relieved. "This was not what I expected tonight to be," she said. "No. Thank you. For staying. For not making it into a thing." "It was a good dinner," I said. "That's just the truth." She almost smiled. "Not quite." "Maybe we could have another one sometime," she said. "One where I'm dressed appropriately. I don't mind how you were dressed." This time she did smile. Brief, but real. She turned and walked toward a car idling at the curb. Her mother's, I assumed. I watched her get in, the skirt gathering and folding through the door. The car pulled away. I stood on the sidewalk until the taillights disappeared around the corner. I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a while without turning on the light. I texted her Sunday morning. I said I hoped things had gone okay with her mother and that the soup had been good. She replied an hour later. She said her mother had cried for approximately 45 minutes and had then made them both very strong tea, and they'd talked until 2 in the morning, and she was tired, but okay. She said she still wasn't sure what okay meant in this specific context, but that it was better than the alternative. I said that sounded about right. She said, "The soup was good. Thank you for the bread." We texted on and off through the week. Not constantly. She was busy. I was busy. The November cabinet job had started, and I was pulling long days. But there was a message most mornings and most evenings, and sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, she'd send me a photo of something she was working on. A kitchen layout, a sample of a cabinet finish she was trying to match, a tile that she loved, but that her client had already said no to. And I'd look at it and tell her what I thought, and she'd argue with me about it sometimes, which I liked. On the Thursday of the second week, she called instead of texting. "I got a call today from Garrett," she said. I was in the truck, parked outside the cabinet shop. I turned down the radio. He said he'd like to get the rest of his things from the apartment next Saturday. "Are you okay with that?" "I think so. I've been going through things and separating what's his. She stopped. "There's a lot of it. He was very present in that apartment." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not a complaint. I'm not complaining. It just takes longer than I thought to see where the space of your own life starts and someone else's ends." "Yeah," I said. "I keep finding kitchen things. He liked to cook, really liked it. I have 4 different types of olive oil because of him." She paused. "I don't really cook. Give them to someone who does." "I'm going to." A pause. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When your relationship ended, the one before, when that was over, what did you do with the time?" I thought about it. "I worked," I said. "A lot. More than I needed to. I took jobs I normally wouldn't bother with because they were small. I fixed a lot of things that didn't strictly need fixing." "That sounds like you." "I also watched a lot of television I can't remember now. And I built a bookshelf I didn't need." I looked out the windshield at the parking lot. And eventually it just started to feel like mine again, my time, my apartment, my evenings. She was quiet on the other end. How long did that take? Longer than I wanted, less long than I thought. She exhaled softly. "Okay," she said. "Good." We talked for another hour, sitting in my parked truck while the light went down around me. She told me about a kitchen project she was designing for a house in Berea, a small farmhouse, older couple. They wanted something that looked original but functioned modern. I told her about a windowsill I'd replaced that afternoon, a 100-year-old sill with a piece of pine cut and fitted to match the original profile. She asked me how I'd match the profile without measurements, and I explained about taking a rubbing and then working the new piece to the shape. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's actually beautiful," and I said, "I'd never thought of it that way." I think you do more beautiful work than you know, she said, not performing it, stating it. My throat closed a little bit. I just fix things, I said. People who say that, she said, are usually the ones doing the thing that matters most. She came to see the cabinet job the following Saturday morning while Garrett was at her apartment getting his things. She showed up in jeans and a canvas jacket and boots that had actual mud on them from somewhere. And she walked through the half-finished kitchen with her hands in her pockets and her eyes moving across the work with the focused, particular attention of someone who actually understood what they were looking at. She crouched down at the base cabinet installation and looked at the reveal on the toe kick. She ran her fingernails along the edge of the face frame. She stood back and looked at the proportions of the uppers. Your reveals are all perfect, she said. They should be. Mine are on a drawing, yours are actually on a wall. She looked at the cabinet run along the back of the kitchen. What wood is this? Soft maple with a birch ply box. Painted. They wanted painted. She made a small sound. Not disapproval, just thought. I would have done inset, she said. I know. It's a newer house. Full overlay made more sense architecturally. She looked at me. I was going to say the same thing, she said. I know. She almost smiled. She looked around the kitchen again. This is going to be good when it's done, she said. It already is. She looked at me. Something shifted in her face. Not a big shift, a small one, the way light changes when a cloud moves. I turned back to the cabinet I'd been installing. How's the apartment? I asked. Quieter, she said after a moment, than I expected. Good quiet or, I don't know yet. Ask me in a week. I looked at the level. I moved it a 1/4 inch. I looked at it again. I'm done here around 2, I said, if you wanted to get lunch after. She didn't answer for a moment. Yeah, she said. Okay. The weeks after that have a texture in my memory that is different from any other stretch of time in my adult life. Ordinary and particular in the same breath. The way a room looks when the light is exactly right and you know it won't hold. We had lunch on that Saturday and dinner the Saturday after. She came by the apartment once to show me a detail on a kitchen rendering she was working on, and stayed for 3 hours talking about cabinetry and how kitchens are the rooms in a house that people build their lives around. I told her I thought the same was true of bookshelves. She said that was an unusual thing to think. I said maybe. In early November, she called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice was quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah. I've been thinking about why I stayed in the dress. I waited. I think I knew when I was standing there at the church that even if he'd changed his mind, even if he'd walked in and said it was all a mistake and he wanted to get married, I would have said no. She said it carefully, as if she was saying it out loud for the first time and listening to how it sounded. I think I'd known for a while. I just didn't have the nerve to be the one to end it. And then he did, and I was devastated. And also, in a way I couldn't say to anyone. I was relieved. And I didn't know how to hold both of those things at once. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet around me. The dress, she said. I think I wore it to dinner because it was honest. Because it was true, I had been there, I had tried. It was real, it happened. And I wanted to be honest about something before I figured out how to pretend I was fine. You weren't pretending to be fine that night, I said. I was trying to be, I know. But you weren't. She was quiet. You looked at me, she said. You looked at me like I was a person, not a disaster. I didn't say anything. That meant more than I can easily explain, she said. The window in the kitchen was dark. The light from the shop across the street made a yellow stripe across the floor. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said. "That covering something up doesn't undo it. You end up with a thing you're pretending isn't there." Yeah, I spent 2 years pretending. About Garrett. About the apartment, about the plan, about whether I was happy. Her voice was level. "I don't want to do that anymore." "What do you want to do?" A pause. "I want to be where I am," she said. "I want to notice what's real." I looked at the stripe of light on my kitchen floor. "I think that's a good plan," I said. "Caleb." "Yeah, I notice you," she said quietly. "That's real." I wanted to say it while I wasn't sure what you'd do with it. I held the phone. "I notice you too," I said. "I've been trying to be careful about it." "Why careful?" "Because you've had a rough season, and I didn't want to be something else that happened to you." She was quiet for a long moment. She stopped. Started again. "That's the least selfish thing anyone has said to me in a long time." "It's also the most scared," I said. The trouble came at the end of November, which is a quiet time for renovations in Harlan. People don't want contractors in their homes through the holidays, and I had time to fill that I hadn't planned on. I was at the lumber yard on a Wednesday afternoon picking up stock for a small job I'd taken, a porch repair out on Route 9. When I ran into a man I knew slightly, a developer named Holt, who had been buying up older residential properties in the county for a few years, renovating them minimally, and renting them at rates that made no sense for the area. He knew what I did. He'd asked me twice before if I wanted work subcontracting for his renovation crew. I'd said no twice. He said hello and started talking about a property on the east side of town, a row of attached storefronts, 4 units. He was buying it. He said there was a kitchen design business on the ground floor. Second floor was residential. I set down the board I was holding. "Who owns it?" I asked. He named a man I didn't know. Then he said, "The tenant on the ground floor designs kitchens. Young woman. She's going to have to relocate. The renovation starts in January." He was watching me as he said it. I don't know what he expected. "How long does she have?" I asked. 60 days from notice, legally. I'd like her out by the 1st. That's 6 weeks. He shrugged. It was a landlord shrug, not apologetic, not cruel, just accounting. I looked at him. "She's a professional tenant," I said. "She'll have rights under the commercial lease. She's month to month. There's no long-term lease to honor." He said it like it was just information. It wasn't just information. I went home and looked up the address. Ground floor was her studio. The residential unit above it was a different tenant. But I recognized the name of the building from something Nora had mentioned. She'd described her studio once as being on the ground floor of the yellow building near the end of East Main. The yellow building near the end of East Main. I called her. She didn't answer. I texted her, "Call me when you can. Nothing's wrong. Just have something to tell you." She called me 12 minutes later. I told her what Holt had told me. There was a long pause on her end. "He said January," she said, quietly. "The 1st. Another pause. "I've been month to month since September," she said. "I was going to sign a longer lease in the new year, after things settled." I could hear her breathing. "That's my studio. All my samples are there, my equipment, my client files." "I know. I can't move a studio in 6 weeks. I know. But you're going to need to call your landlord first thing tomorrow and get everything in writing. And I think you should call someone who knows commercial tenant law in this county, because month to month is still a tenancy and 60 days is 60 days. She was quiet for a moment. How do you know about this? She asked. I've rented commercial space for 6 years. You learn things. Another pause. Okay, she said. Okay. I could hear her trying to settle herself. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just call him tomorrow, first thing. She did. She also called a property attorney out of Harlan, a woman named Delgado, who turned out to have handled half a dozen similar cases in the last 3 years. Nora had, in fact, signed a lease addendum in the summer that constituted a fixed term through March, something her landlord had evidently not communicated to Holt at closing. It wasn't over. Holt pushed back. And for 3 weeks in December, there were emails and registered letters and a meeting that Nora described to me afterward with the careful flatness she used when she was working very hard not to sound as upset as she was. I went with her to the meeting. I didn't say much. I sat beside her at the table in the attorney's office, and I listened. Holt was polished and reasonable, in the particular way that polished and reasonable people get when they know they're on slightly shaky ground. He said the property was his now, and he had plans. He said he was sure they could find an accommodation. He said, at one point, that a young woman running a small design practice out of a ground-floor studio was not an ideal match for the direction he had in mind for the building. Nora put her pen down very carefully on the notepad in front of her. The direction you have in mind for the building, she said, has no bearing on the terms of my lease, which I have in writing, which your attorney has seen. Her voice was completely level. I have a lease through March. I'll be moving to a new studio before then. I've already begun looking, and when I go, I'll go on my schedule within the legal terms and leave the space in better condition than I found it. She looked at him. Is there anything else you need to discuss? Holt looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his attorney. The meeting ended shortly after. In the elevator on the way down, she stood with her arms crossed and her chin slightly up, and she didn't say anything until we reached the lobby. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't do anything. You were there. She looked at me. You were there, and you didn't try to take over. You were there. I looked at her. I'll always be there, I said. It came out quieter than I expected. She heard it. The elevator doors opened and neither of us moved for a moment. Caleb, she said. I know, I said. I've been trying to say it right. I keep waiting for the right time. There isn't a right time, she said. There's just time. We walked out into the December cold. I have been trying, I said, for about 2 months, to figure out how to tell you that the evening you showed up in that dress was one of the best evenings of my life. Not because of the dress and not because of the story. Because of you. Because of who you were in it. I looked at the street. I don't say things like that easily. I know, she said. I think about that hallway bookshelf I told you about. The one for the family that needed more room. I looked at her. That's what this has felt like finding a way to create space that was already supposed to be there. She was quiet for a long moment. You're really slow, Caleb, she said. Something unlocked in my chest. Yeah, I said. I know. She stepped forward and kissed me on the sidewalk in front of a property attorney's office on East Main Street in December, with the cold coming off the road and the courthouse clock reading 3:30. It was soft and certain and tasted like the coffee we'd had in the lobby before the meeting. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright and her nose was red from the cold. I started noticing you, she said, the night you asked for the long version. 6 months later, Nora's new studio was in a converted Victorian on Elm Street, with 12-foot ceilings and original heart pine floors that she hired me to refinish before she moved in. I worked 3 weekends on those floors. She brought coffee both mornings of the first weekend and argued with me about the finish. She wanted a matte. I thought a low sheen would hold better with foot traffic. I was right. She said I was right, which was its own kind of satisfaction. Her client list had grown. She'd picked up 2 contracts from Lexington and one from a custom builder out of Barberville who found her through a referral. She had a drafting table near the east window and a sample wall that took up most of one side of the room, and a rug she'd found at an estate sale that was slightly too big for the space, and which we had moved 4 times trying to find where it worked. On a Saturday afternoon in May, I was finishing a set of floating shelves she'd asked me to build along the west wall of the studio. She was at her drafting table. The window was open, and there was bird song coming through it, and the smell of the floor finish and of the coffee she'd made. She looked up and watched me set the last shelf bracket. "The reveals are perfect," she said. "They should be." "Level?" I held the level up without turning around. She went back to her drawing. I thought about Dottie, who had knocked on my door on a Sunday evening with a piece of paper and a look on her face that did not invite argument. I thought about a white wedding dress catching the restaurant light, and a woman sitting very still with her hands folded, bracing for the expression she'd decided I was going to have. I thought about what you miss in a life if you drive past. There are rooms you walk into and immediately understand. Not because they're perfect, or because everything matches, or because whoever built them knew what they were doing, but because the space makes sense for the people inside it, because it's exactly as big as it needs to be, because the light comes in from the right direction. I'd spent my career making rooms like that for other people. I'd never thought to wonder what it would feel like to be inside one. Now I knew.